Now we're looking at how a seahorse rules the brain as an intuitive sensitive and why it's linked to enlightenment. Hippocampus healing is the thing, in my opinion, that makes, as an intuitive sensitive person, our sensitivity the most positive thing ever. Now, hippocampus healing is probably something you've never even heard of. It's nothing that I've ever really heard of. It's a terminology that I've decided upon myself because this is the main area that I have focused on and had huge amounts of results as far as this area is concerned, because absolutely I think it is the part that really helps an intuitive sensitive to transform their inner world, to accept their sensitivity as something highly important and something that you hold with high regard, rather than it be something that you're always trying to sort of get rid of or dampen down or try and push to one side. And as far as this area of the brain is concerned, in really understanding what this is about and understanding what you're doing with this part of who you are makes it 10 times easier for you to access the intuitive self, use it well, use your sensitivity well, and at the same time feel really very settled and calm inside. Now, right at the moment, you might think that that feels like an impossibility, which is why you're looking at the development of the enlightened self. So what I'm about to show you, as far as this particular part of the brain is concerned, is something that is vitally important in terms of you feeling more settled, you feeling that you can move beyond the blocks, and feeling that anything that is too heightened and hyper in your system can effectively be calmed down. Now, part of my thoughts on this whole process is, and why it's so incredibly important that you acknowledge this part of your development stage, is because without the acknowledgement, without the actual understanding of this, we don't know where we're working from. Which is why I'm going to explain this to you, but trying to make it as easy to explain as I possibly can for you to gain a larger picture rather than you to focus on the detail of it. Now, this is what I have focused on in terms of my life direction, and I have a very keen interest, research-wise, into the hippocampus and its purpose and its use and what the brain uses it for. So it's very little focused on, especially in our development world in terms of either spiritual or personal development. It's not really focused on at all. But I would see it as a crucial part of our brain, and it is, in my opinion, the key to the enlightened self. So what is it? Well, the hippocampus is Greek for seahorse. Okay, it means simply seahorse. Why is it called this the seahorse? Why is it called the hippocampus? Because it actually resembles an actual seahorse. That's what it looks like in terms of what's sat in the brain. So it's part of the system that regulates stress. Okay, so the hippocampus, this is again one of my very crude drawings. The hippocampus regulates our ability to understand stress. Its structure also influences something called the HPA axis. Okay, so the HPA axis is something that it's what the system is, how it's all put together. So what is the HPA axis? Well, it consists of the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenals. Okay, now you've heard of at least one of those, most certainly the adrenals, because as an intuitive sensitive, we're always really quite aware of the adrenals, adrenaline, the things that we associate with that. Pituitary, you may well have heard of, because in the ways of looking at things, and as far as a spiritual angle is concerned, quite often the pituitary and the pineal are often talked about, especially in relation to the third eye. The hypothalamus regulates things. Okay, so it's part of this. It's part of this process. But the hippocampus within this is the area that is incredibly important. So all of this provides a feedback system. Okay, so the feedback system means that information comes up through the system and goes round, and it goes up and round and up and round and up and round. And some of those things will feel like they go round and round and round. So it's all key within the endocrine system. Okay, so the endocrine system is how the body regulates its hormonal load, how it sends messages, and how it sends messages within the nervous system. So the hippocampus, what does it do? Well, it stores memory. Okay, so it stores everything that we have to do as far as memory is concerned. All those things that you remember really quite clearly, or are a little bit fuzzy, or where your mind has switched you off. So sometimes as an intuitive sensitive, you can find that certain chunks of your life you have absolutely no memory of, and you don't know why. But all of it is stored in here. It's stored in the hippocampus. For a lot of intuitive sensitives, it tends to be that memory is very clear, especially when it's very emotionally driven. So we tend to have very clear memories around things that are emotional. Why? Because it's something that's featured in our nervous system rather than just a kind of a head memory. Okay. So what does the HPA axis do? Well, these connecting factors, what do? They regulate our immune system. So they regulate our immune response to things, and also inflammation. So when we're looking at something in life that we feel bruised around, what's inflammation? Well, it's bruising. So when you hurt yourself, obviously the physical body will have a reaction. We then have a swelling and a bruising. But inflammation, as far as factors in the body, and we're very aware of inflammation. This is partly why lots of intuitive sensitives, as an example, are sugar monsters, and why we have reactions in our systems around sugar and inflammation. And we have it because of the HPA axis. So when we experience stress, so when something is stressful, what do people quite often do, whether they're an intuitive sensitive or not? But what we do, particularly as intuitive sensitives, is we'll go, our substance of choice is often sugar. Okay, so it would be sugar in its various forms in order to try and calm this down. Partly because we're looking at insulin reactions and responses, but we're also looking to try and calm a key hormone down, which we'll look at in a moment. So the HPA axis, what does it do? It regulates our immune and inflammation responses. Okay, that's what its main job is. So bruised. So if we look at what part of you feels bruised. Okay, so if you look at it along those lines, you can understand how the HPA axis feeds back communication, because as an intuitive sensitive, part of us really does feel bruised. So as we looked at in the last session, prenatal stress. So prenatal stress means events that happened before our actual birth that you are not even aware of, has a lasting impact on, or it has a lasting influence rather, within the HPA axis, okay? And it has shown in various studies to have an influence to the extent which is the reason for a hyperreactive HPA stress response to certain things in life. Okay, so the stress responses that circulate, some of those stress responses that circulate in this axis in your life are prenatal. Okay, which means that those were developed before you were born. So the development of this stress reaction and stress response was developed in the womb. Okay, now this isn't just me saying this as a theory. This is something that is accepted as far as various different areas of research are concerned. So this is why it's tough as a sensitive to be able to regulate our patterns, because quite often these things that have had a prenatal influence before we had any control over things are actually directing our immune reactions and our inflammation and our bruised responses to things, but also how we store stress, how we store the memory of that and how that circulates. So these are, you can look at these as some of the, some of our pre-life survival mechanisms. As we then, you can also link this to the survival mechanisms of the 4Fs. Okay, so now you can perhaps imagine what's going on in your own system where you haven't got any influence over because it's doing it all by itself. Okay, and where that comes from. So rather than go blame your parents or blame your mother, it's just so that you are aware that your ability as a sensitive is developed prenatally. It's developed in the womb, in terms of there will have been a stress. Okay, there will have been a stress that your mother experienced, or she's a sensitive herself, and so her ability to process stress will have been impaired, okay, whilst you were being carried, which means that you've got this very sensitized HPA axis, okay. So this is the reason why sensitives have, as an example, whacked out cortisol levels. Okay, so whacked out cortisol levels. What are cortisol levels? Well, cortisol levels cortisol is something, it is kind of fired out by the adrenals, okay? And so it's one of these stress hormones, okay? It's normal. We're supposed to have levels of cortisol, which tells the body to prepare to run. Again, clicking off with the 4Fs, to run, to hide. It prepares the body for flight, okay? Prepares the body hugely for fight and flight. So we end up, this is the reason why intuitive sensitives have whacked out cortisol levels, where they're not regulating correctly. And when those aren't regulating correctly, we end up with sleep issues. So you perhaps find you have issues with sleep. You don't sleep properly. You sleep quite lightly. You might find that you actually sleep too much. That you find that sleep has been some kind of an issue through your life, to a certain degree or to an increasing degree. Okay, not all, but this will be partly why. Immune system issues. Okay, so this is the reason for immune system issues, immune system sensitivity. I did a piece of research a few years ago with a medical practitioner, looking at questionnaire-wise as to the percentage of intuitive sensitives that seem to have or have got a diagnosed autoimmune issue. Now, in looking at those results, they were 20% higher than normal, than the average. Okay, 20% higher instance of autoimmune issues. Well, what are autoimmune issues? Well, these are the things that we already know about, things like diabetes, things like thyroid issue. All of these are all kind of autoimmune related areas. And some of those are, the more subtle ones, which is an increase in sensitivities, food sensitivities, allergies, all of that kind of thing, which would suggest a stress factor in the HPA axis. Okay, this is also a reason why lots of intuitive sensitives have a real digestion issue, or their gut is easily irritated. Again, because of this, and well, really because of this, but also the levels of cortisol that are not easily regulated. Okay, for an intuitive sensitive. Why? Because of aspects of prenatal stress, which then has an ongoing impact on the HPA axis. Okay, now this messaging system, what's happening to it is going round and round in a loop, and it's storing its memory in the hippocampus. Okay, this is how we look at it. So the digestion problems, the consistent low-level anxiety, most intuitive sensitives have got some kind of low-level anxiety, this kind of feeling that something's about to happen, but you don't know what's going to happen, or feeling that there is this sort of low level of something always kind of going on. Or for some, you might find that that's more exaggerated, and it's clearly a line of depression, or some kind of exaggerated sense of your system being out of whack as far as anxiety is concerned. Again, this is the communication that's happening in this particular way that things link up, okay, with the hypothalamus, the pituitary and the adrenals. Chronic fatigue. This is why chronic fatigue and burnout are huge factors for intuitive sensitive people. Why? Because of irregularities as far as the HPA axis is concerned. Again, some of those are developed prenatally in terms of why this becomes hyperactive. Okay, it becomes hyperactive, overproduces cortisol over a period of time, can create chronic fatigue and burnout. The chronic fatigue happens because the circadian rhythm, so what's our circadian rhythm? It's the cycles, so the sleep cycles, that's also regulated by the pituitary and how our body manages metabolism and all of that kind of thing. So the chronic fatigue happens because the circadian rhythms get messed up. Okay, they get messed up. The circadian rhythms are meant to regulate our ability as far as the cortisol is concerned. But the circadian rhythms get messed up with the disrupted cortisol levels. Okay, so it's all a circle that goes round and round and round. And then if you add to that, so if we add to it, so maybe there's prenatal stress, and then let's say you've had a stressful early life, this again has an extra pressure on this system. Okay, so you're then adding to it. So for the intuitive sensitive, they are exposed to prolonged stress. Why? Well, prolonged stress because of our nervous system hyperactivity. So we are more aware of things, we're more aware of things going on in our life. But if you then add into that a stress, as I just said, let's say an early life stress, so it's not only prenatal stress, early life stress, something that we can really identify with that's prolonged, obviously this the HPA axis gets really quite upset. In my own life, this for me has gone through a period of time where it was completely blown up. My cortisol levels, when they were measured, were off the scale. They were extremely high and the body wasn't regulating it. What did I then have as a reaction in my own system? Was these were all completely fired up, out of whack. Adrenals weren't working properly. All of this wasn't working properly. Okay, so I then ended up with unusual autoimmune issues. So one of my most unusual autoimmune issues is my body overproduces collagen. What is collagen? What does that do? Well, I literally, and this is how clever the body is, in order for my system to be able to deal with this, it literally became thick-skinned. So I have a rare autoimmune issue where I become thick-skinned. My skin becomes too thick because there is a huge dumping of collagen into the cells. Okay, so thick-skinned as an expression is having to become thick-skinned about things. So it's incredible how sometimes the body will literally interpret that in a way to protect itself. Just using that as an example. So for the intuitive sensitive, that prolonged exposure to stress, which is where we find it tricky for our own HPA to regulate itself because of this, sometimes because of this, but certainly because of this, is what part of you feels bruised. What happens over a period of time? Well, the hippocampus can start to shrink. So hippocampal shrinkage is an issue in many different areas. Okay, I won't go hugely into those, but in other physical areas, hippocampus shrinkage does become an issue. So why does it happen? Well, it happens because there is a prolonged exposure to high levels of glucocorticoids. Okay, and what are those? These are things. It's a kind of, one of those is cortisol. It's a hormonal thing which is released by the adrenals. Okay, it's a steroid thing. So cortisol is kind of a steroid. It's about then regulating the system. So what then happens is high levels of this are released by the adrenals, okay, which then causes problems as far as the hippocampus is concerned. It then creates hippocampal shrinkage. So to make this really quite simple, because this can get really very complicated. Hopefully you've understood some of it. Okay, you've got a kind of feel of it. You only need to have a feel of it. You don't have to understand it 100%, but if you just have a feel of this, you then get to realize that it's not your fault. Okay, lots of intuitive sensitives get caught in this cycle. Oh, it's me, it's my fault. Why can't I do this? Why can't I stop this? Why can't I only? And then, that self-criticism gets higher and higher, and this stress gets higher and higher. So it goes round and round and round and round, and then you feel hopeless because you think, well, I just can't do it. Okay, I just can't get this right. All this stuff that I know, why am I still experiencing this stress in my system, or where it's not working properly, or I just can't get beyond go. All of that blame thing that you position towards yourself, hopefully you've got some idea now that it's misplaced. Okay, this is something that's been going on, and that until this point it's been outside of your control. But in short, what does it mean? It's one big stress cycle that began prenatally. Okay, so it began before you were born. So there is plenty of evidence, just giving you this as an example, there's plenty of evidence that prenatally stressed animals, so using examples of animals, because obviously it's much easier to scientifically study animals, especially those on short life cycles, things like rats, etc., mice and rats, that there's a lot of evidence to say that prenatally stressed animals show abnormally high blood glucose levels. Okay, so that's sugar levels, insulin levels, and have fewer glucocorticoid receptors in the hippocampus, okay, in this area. So they have less ability to be able to dissolve some aspects of the cortisol and the stress cycles, okay, and have unusually high levels of unusually high glucose levels. Well, what's high glucose levels? What are those mechanisms for us in terms of survival instincts? Well, if we go back into survival instincts in the 4Fs, it's about preparing the body to flee. Okay, so if the body is pumped full of sugar, pumped full of high glucose levels, it's ready to run and use all that glucose. And so generally in life, how things get stressed, etc., that's what happens. The body is supposed to be prepared to run, etc. But for an intuitive sensitive, those glucose levels remain high for your entire life. Okay, so for me, as an example, where mine very, very high as far as this was concerned, and my cortisol levels were off the scale, I became diabetic. I've never been able to, I've looked at people being able to eat a packet of biscuits and gone, how do they do that? That's quite incredible. There's no way my body would allow me to, because if I bump my insulin levels too high, it goes out very, very quickly. So I, for a period of time, had to manage my way through diabetes, even though my diet wasn't bad. I've had to manage my way through weight issues, putting on really quite high amounts of weight when I wasn't particularly, eating hugely. Certainly not more than the average person. In fact, quite often a lot less than people around me. But I was getting bigger and bigger and bigger because all of this was very high. Okay, so for those of you who feel that you've been putting on weight and you can't understand why, it could well be that you've been eating the wrong things because your glucose levels are already high because of this prenatal stress. Okay, just using these as an example so you've got an idea of a picture, so you don't then start to think that everything is your fault. Okay, so why is the hippocampus so important in all of this? Because it's our stress regulator. So with too much stress, it makes it really tricky, as far as this area is concerned, to access the enlightened self. So if we're forever, our system is forever trying to fight something, and it's got cortisol levels out of hand, it's got insulin levels firing on all different directions, and then if your insulin's already high, what do you want? You want more sugar. It may have been in freeze, so your heightened response may have been freeze, and so instead of actually doing something when it's high, when this has all gone bluff, in a very high state, you've frozen, you've sat on the sofa and thought, I can't do anything, I don't know what's the matter with me, I can't move, I haven't done anything, I don't feel inclined to. It may have done that, which then driven your insulin levels high, and blah blah blah, and it goes round and round, and then it comes up with what you feel bruised by, and then you get inflammation, and then everything starts swelling. I'm sure that at some level you've been there, or your sleep's gone, your metabolism's collapsed, all of that kind of stuff, and so it doesn't work. And then you go into, and then the whole thing, this comes too high, and then you go, and then you crash out, burnt, exhausted, into chronic fatigue, and then the cycle goes and becomes really hard and difficult. Okay, so the hippocampus is incredibly important because it becomes our stress regulator, and so therefore too much stress, very difficult to then access the enlightened self. So in terms of regulating my own system, This was the area, as I say, hippocampus healing is, in my view, something incredibly important, because I think without it, without looking at some of the memory storage in here, stress regulator, etc., it makes it very difficult for the HPA axis to then start regulating itself. In my view, what I have done is work very strongly within this area. This has calmed right down. Yes, of course, the autoimmune issues are still there, but they are manageable. They are in a managed place. Otherwise, the next thing that you then have to do is then you have to take immune suppressants and all of those kind of things, blah, 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 which then just, in my view, just keeps exaggerating this whole cycle. Then the pituitary can't regulate itself, can't see in terms of its metabolic rate, how it processes light, etc. Adrenals start going whack, boom, off, out, and then your survival instincts, one becomes again heightened, too strong, too high, and then you end up doing nothing. Okay, so this was the key area. Hippocampus was the key area. Hippocampal healing was the area that I focused on. Okay, and this area of the brain has two routes. It has two routes that it follows. There is the cognitive hippocampus, which is that this is the part. So cognitive, we could say. And this is memory. Okay, learning, how we learn things. Okay, so it's a cognitive part of the hippocampus. And then we have another part, which I would say is the part that is especially relevant to you as an intuitive sensitive. Now, this part, in terms of the cognitive and the memory and the learning, etc., this is the part that we've heard of. Where you may have heard of the hippocampus as far as dementia is concerned. So what is seen in patients with dementia is that the hippocampus starts to shrink. Okay, so it has hippocampal shrinkage, and definitely as far as the cognitive part is concerned, yes, memory goes and learning ability goes, etc., which is why you say it's really important to exercise the brain and all of this kind of thing, which is the cognitive parts. Now we have another part to the hippocampus, which is the emotional part. Okay, so the emotional part is to do with how we regulate emotions and our motivational behavior. Okay, so this part, so yes, we've got these two parts, and in my experience, which has been in working with this area, this improves. But I would say, in my view, I'm not sure, this is just in my view, that if you work on the cognitive, it doesn't mean to say the emotions improve. But certainly if you work on the emotions, then the cognitive aspect improves. So, the hippocampus has this whole area to focus on as well. So the effects of stress and cortisol on the hippocampus is thought. So stress and cortisol is thought to lead to structural changes in the actual physical part of the brain, so the hippocampus. And those structural parts will be the hippocampal shrinkage. Okay, so again, in terms of cognitive memory, etc., in brains which have got dementia, absolutely you see hippocampal shrinkage. It's also very linked to hormones. So when a person's hormone levels start to decline, it's under pressure to keep cognitive memory and to not go into shrinkage, which is why one of the big things in terms of dementia prevention is to exercise the brain, use it. It's the whole saying, use it or lose it, which is why it becomes something that's incredibly important. In my view, also in protecting it, that utilising and resolving this part in terms of the emotions also helps to protect the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is a highly stress-sensitive brain region. Okay, and that's something that is an absolute given, that it's the hippocampus is highly sensitive to stress. Okay, and the structural changes that happen with it, so the hippocampal shrinkage, you can always look at it as a dried out seahorse. You know, when it's not fed, where it's not looked after, when it's not watered, where it's not taken care of, it literally shrivels. So that it's like a dried out seahorse. So it's very, very, very sensitive to stress. Okay. Now that impact, that stress impact, is reversible. Okay, you can reverse that. You can absolutely reverse that, and it's reversible with the normalization of cortisol levels. This is where you then start to work on those cortisol levels. So, guess why the intuitive sensitive person is attracted to spiritual principles, and how this journey to enlightenment helps normalize stress factors, okay, stored in these crucial areas of the brain. Guess why? Guess why we're attracted to it? Guess why you have been attracted to looking at life through spiritual principles, through looking at it through activating this part of yourself, an attraction to it, why you've been attracted to it, why it has developed in you, why you've wanted it. Okay, have a little bit, use your imagination as to why this is what you've wanted to do. Okay, why, and why it doesn't go away, and why it's something that you want. Give you a little clue as far as that's concerned. It's so that you are subconsciously, unconsciously seeking to protect your hippocampus, okay? To stop any atrophy, any kind of moving away, to start to be able to regulate the HPA axis, to solve these prenatal influences so that this can better regulate itself, that your cortisol levels can even out, and that you become much more able to regulate your emotions and memory. This is why, as an example, why you have a strong connection and a search for authentic, because you are cleansing and clearing out old memories stored in the hippocampus, whereas lots of people don't even bother doing this, don't even bother going there, don't even, the whole denial aspect, all of that. This is why your system it's too pressured. It cannot handle denial. It cannot handle people who want that, because it's more stress on your HPA axis, and which is why you are under pressure to solve some of these early, very, before you were born, stresses that are stored here. Why? Early life stresses, which is why it's so important to look at the foundation, which we looked at in the last session, and why you're now in this place of acknowledgement. Okay, because in acknowledging this, we then start to work significantly as far as this is concerned, so the cortisol levels, but without having to go, I must de-stress, because that doesn't do anything as far as we're concerned as an intuitive sensitive, because this is too high. Okay, all well and good, tell us all that till we're blue in the face, but in my view, in my opinion, and in my experience, it's this this area of focus, what's stored here, which then brings down the cortisol levels, which then takes you into this position where your HPA evens out and it balances. And that is why you are attracted to enlightenment. This is why you are at this particular stage in your development cycle. This is why you're wanting to do this, and this is why it's a very strong driving force, which takes us on to the next subject.